The Football World Cup's the biggest sporting event in the world, and you can keep up with the play with me, Jason Piney, and my good mate and former All-White David Choate on Football Fever. Listen daily throughout the World Cup as we bring you all the action from Qatar. Choate and I love football. We can't wait for the World Cup to get underway. So join us as we live through all the goals, all the drama, all the glory. Download Football Fever from iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. Major coaching shake-up in the Northern Hemisphere. Just 10 months out from the Rugby World Cup, both Wales and England have said goodbye to their respective coaches. Wayne Pivac and Eddie Jones relieved of their duties. Warren Gatland will take charge of Wales. He was, of course, Wayne Pivac's predecessor and was in charge of the team between 2007 and 2019. Leading them to the semis of the Rugby World Cup in 2019 before leaving that post. Leicester Tigers coach Steve Borthwick, meantime, is the hot favourite to take over as coach of England, but as yet there's been no confirmation of that. Let's bring in James Burridge from the BBC. Thanks for joining us across New Zealand, James. Can we start with Eddie Jones? Was his departure a major surprise to you?
I think watching the RFU's movements since the World Cup, since the 2019 World Cup, the whole understanding was that they were going to stick with Eddie right through until France next year. And I think possibly what surprised us was that actually they had decided they weren't going to go through with that after all. So I wouldn't have been that surprised if Eddie was surprised, because Eddie's mantra all along had been judge me on the World Cup. This whole jam tomorrow philosophy that, you know, we can get spanked by the Springboks. We can come back from nowhere to draw against the All Blacks. We can lose to Argentina, but don't worry, fellas, because in France next year, I'll get you to another World Cup final. We might even win it. And that message no one believed it anymore. And actually, the people, I think you really do fall into two camps on this as well. I think if you speak to a lot of ex-players, they'll say to you, well, actually, no, he's fair. That's fair dues. That's what he was booked on. He was booked to say, take me to the World Cup. I've got an unbelievable record of the World Cup. Judge me on that. But then you've got everyone else who pays over £100 a ticket at Twickenham, people who invest in English rugby every year, and it's not good enough. And it hasn't been good enough since 2019, and England haven't found an identity since 2019, and it had just worn a bit thin.
After the loss to South Africa a couple of weeks ago, I saw you tweet, 1 year from Rugby World Cup and I have no idea who England want to be. And you just mentioned identity there. Was that Eddie Jones's biggest downfall, that he hasn't established England's identity?
I think since 2019, yes. I mean, I think if you were to sit Eddie Jones down now, he'd tell you what English rugby's identity was. He did it in the very first press conference when he took over from Stuart Lancaster after the shambolic World Cup in England in 2015. It was about a strong set piece. It was about a resolute defence. It was about, you know, ferocious defence and just being unrelenting. The scrum, the line out the maul, those are the backbone of English rugby. And that's what Eddie had identified. And he went on this ridiculous run of 17 unbeaten matches. The problem is, after a while, I think it's not just rugby, Jason, and you've seen this in all the other sports that you've covered. If you're a coach and you've been in power for too long, the message just wears out, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
The number of coaches that Eddie has had in his time. Now, Eddie Jones is one of the best coaches in world rugby, do not get me wrong. And I think we can all agree with that. But there comes a time when the message wears a bit thin. And because Eddie works people so unbelievably hard, when you are trying to forge a new identity as a team, you're kind of caught between two bases, aren't you? On the one hand, he wants a team which is, you know, resolute in defence, strong set piece, and just very difficult to break down. But you also need to have a plan B. And the players just become very confused with how they are supposed to play. And I think that last 10 minutes against the All Blacks was really telling, because by 70 minutes on the clock, the game was as good as over. And so the players just thought, to hell with it, let's just play some rugby. And when they took that attitude, you saw what happened.
Is Steve Borthwick certain to take over?
I'm not even sure Steve Borthwick knows if he wants to take over. He gave a press conference today, and Steve Borthwick does not like the media. in this country. He got stung when he was England captain, and he's never really trusted us ever since for various reasons. So he plays the straightest bat to the straightest ball you will ever see. And he was not happy about all the questions asked about England. I'm surprised that the RFU haven't managed to get over the line. Here we are at Friday evening, and you would have thought they should have had their ducks in a row to get at least Borthwick signed and sealed. For some reason, it hasn't happened yet. Leicester are in the Champions Cup starting this weekend. They're playing the Ospreys, and so Borthwick is being asked all these questions at a press conference which was originally scheduled for Wednesday, has now been put back to today, and was pretty peeved that he had to answer all these questions about England. But I'm afraid he's going to have to get used to it, because if he's going to get this job, that this is just the start, and he has got to be prepared for the bigger stage. And I only hope, for England's sake, from a media perspective, in terms of the connection with the fans, if he does decide to take this job, then he's got to try and loosen up a little. And part of the problem for Borthwick is that he wasn't groomed for this job now. England and the RFU were hoping to pull him in after the next World Cup. And isn't it fascinating how coaches, and look at Wayne Pivac as a perfect example, you come from the club game and you're hoping to get that opportunity. You're kind of groomed as a coach, hoping that your time will come in maybe a year. You think you might be right in a year, 18 months' time. But then suddenly everything changes, a coach gets sacked, and you're the next cab on the rank. But actually, it's a bit too early for you. And in many ways, I kind of feel that same sympathy for Wayne Pivac, because as great a coach as he is, did he get the Wales job a little bit too soon? Could he have done with a couple more years? Borthwick could definitely do with another 18 months to learn a bit more. But you almost feel it's now or never in a strange way for Steve Borthwick. That said, we're none the wiser as to what's happening. And maybe it'll be announced over the next 48 hours after the weekend, but no one knows yet.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that. Just on Pivac, his removal looked almost inevitable, didn't it, James, after recent losses to South Africa, New Zealand, most notably Georgia. What will his legacy be, Wayne Pivac?
I think Pivac is just one of those unlucky coaches, because Welsh rugby has got loads of problems right now. The provinces still, a lot of the players playing in the provinces don't even know if they'll be playing for them next year. A deal hasn't been struck with the provinces, with the WRU. The entire professional game in Wales right now is in a state of turmoil. And Gatland, when he was in charge, was able to kind of paper over the cracks, because he was unbelievably able to almost create this brilliant sense of good vibe feeling with the national team, which covered over the cracks the provinces. In terms of Pivac, I suppose my point is, after he won that first Six Nations title, when he started losing, it exacerbated the problems everywhere else. So it's not as if a Welsh rugby fan right now looks at Welsh rugby and thinks we're in a good state. Okay, the club game's all right, but the national team's having a bit of a shocker. The whole game in Wales is in trouble right now. And so Pivac was unlucky because he was he was part of a wider problem. But in terms of the results on the pitch, they haven't been good enough. He knows it's a results business. And I've got to be honest, the shadow of Gatland lurking over him. I mean, Gats was doing punditry work for Amazon in Cardiff on that last game against Australia. You just got the sense that it was inevitable. And I think the other thing was that the WRU had probably made movements after that Georgia defeat. Very sadly, from Pivac's perspective, to lose to Italy and Georgia at home in the same year is just unacceptable, and you're never going to get back from that.
Can I ask your view on Scott Robertson and whether you foresee him ever coaching in the Northern Hemisphere, an international team in the Northern Hemisphere? Do you see that in our future?
We'd love to have Scott Robertson up here. My God, for every rugby pundit who wants Scott Robertson, you and I could go out and have a slap-up meal, Jason. I mean, they love him up here. Don't get me wrong. The fans would love Scott Robertson. But for some reason or another, it's not happened yet. And maybe, I think the bigger problem for Scott Robertson is probably the mindset of the RFU. There's this clamour for it. The next person after Eddie Jones had to be an English coach or someone from the English game. and maybe that will count against him. But equally, Scott Robertson knows. I mean, he's at some point, if he joins England now, does that rule him out of the All Blacks after the next World Cup? You know what it's like. It's very, very difficult getting the timing right in professional sport, particularly if you're a coach. And Ryan O'Gara made this quite clear when he ruled himself out of the England job. I thought that was really interesting. Not that O'Gara was ready, by the way, to take that level of job, but he signed up for 5 more years at La Rochelle, and both him and Robertson were kind of seen as the next darlings on the coaching circuit world. I'd love Wayne Smith to come and take over England, but that's not going to happen.
If you had to put a bet on who wins the Rugby World Cup next year today, where's your 10 quid going?
I have to go on France, wouldn't it? At home. The romantic in me, Jason, would love France to win it. Just because watching rugby in France right now is just the most incredible experience. You've got this buy-in between the fans, the unions, the clubs. And when you go and watch France play at home in any stadium in France, the atmosphere is just sensational. They come alive. And my money would be on France right now. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Springboks cause a few problems as well. The fascinating question for me is Ireland, because Ireland have peaked between World Cups in the past and never really brought it to a World Cup stage. So I would love to see Ireland produce the goods, but I don't think they'll get over the line. I think it will be France at this stage.
All right, what about France tomorrow against your boys in the football? Who you got there?
There's a lot of nervousness, Jason, over here right now.
I bet.
Mind you, stranger things have happened. Now Brazil have gone out, which I still can't quite believe. Stranger things have happened. This England team are just such a breath of fresh air. So they're great fun to be with, and they're good teams. And as I try and shut my little son up from entering our telephone call, the England team are fun. They're exciting, and they play with no pressure. And that's the great thing about that England football team right now. But there is no one piling any pressure on them, and they can just go and express themselves. And Gareth Southgate is doing a brilliant job as the boss.
It's always great to chat to you, James. Thanks so much, mate. Look forward to catching up again when the new year rolls around.
Cheers, Jason. All the best.
Take care of your property with equipment you can count on, like the Kubota BX and LO1 Series compact tractors, part of our under 100 horsepower tractor lineup, rated #1 for reliability, and Z-Series mowers and Sidekick utility vehicles, where durability meets speed. Visit your local Kubota dealer for a demo today. Go to KubotaUSA.com for full disclaimer.
Visit GoKubota.com for a dealer near you.